Hello and welcome to episode 327 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick, here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. Hello, Ian. What's going on?
Hello, Jason. Not as much as there has been, which is frankly very welcome.
That's good, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I've been able to catch up on things that I've been not necessarily putting off, just haven't been able to get to for a few weeks. So that's
I
a
feel
welcome
that
change.
But also for me, it's been a nice couple of days. We got details about Cranky Dorkfest and
Absolutely,
LAX
yes.
Fest. Congrats if you managed to grab a block room at
They
the
did
H
go
Hotel.
quick.
It went like that. If your name is Jeremy Dwyer Lindgren, and if you're listening, you missed out because you're on the West Coast. Sorry about that.
We'll give them an extra
I
punch.
grabbed a room, so that's all that matters. Yeah, an extra punch card. Not an extra full sandwich, extra punch card.
Oh, okay.
Extra punch on the punch card.
I
can't go to a full sandwich, but I booked some other stuff. I booked an EasyJet flight today. I booked a Smart Wings flight today. Booked a French Bee flight the other day. North Atlantic flight the other day. So stuff is getting interesting.
So let's talk about Cranky Dorkfest because hopefully a bunch of you can join us again this year. Jason's going this year, so I'm looking forward to that. We'll have some of our other friends there as well. So it's shaping up to be a good one. Cranky Dorkfest / Spot LAX with NYC Aviation is once again the second weekend of September. So we've got Saturday, September 13th will be the Cranky Dorkfest. 11 a.m. to 1 p.m.-ish. It just kind of goes until it's done. We'll have all sorts of raffle prizes and things like that, like we always do. But Brett is doing it differently this year. So you will have to register in advance for the raffle. When that information becomes available, we will let everybody know, as well as link to that as soon as that gets set up so that you can all partake in that. But other than that, we've got the Friday party at the H Hotel, sponsored by NYC Aviation, along with Airline Videos Live. So they'll be doing a live broadcast from the H Hotel's balcony, as they always do. That will require tickets. Those will go on sale on the 19th of July, and we'll put a link to the information from NYC Aviation about that if you want to go to that party. And then, of course, there's dinner at the Proud Bird. That one is just a show up and eat some food and watch some planes thing, the way Dorkfest is. As far as I know, there's no sign up or anything required for a raffle there this year, but we'll keep everybody posted. So hopefully you can join us on September 12th and 13th in Los Angeles. Book your tickets early. Flights seem relatively reasonably priced at this point.
I'd say downright cheap compared to years past.
Yes. And hotels are reasonable-ish.
Downright not cheap.
Yeah.
Win some, lose some. Certainly losing the hotel battle this year.
So do the best you can there. Find a buddy and bunk up, I guess. But we hope to see as many of you as we can that weekend. So looking forward to that one. Yeah, Jason, while we're talking about travel, Jason, you're traveling next week to very exciting DC. So have fun with that.
Dulles, not DC.
Sorry,
don't oversell it.
I'm sorry. We will figure out the show there for next week. And then the week after, I don't want to jinx myself, because when we've said this before, events have transpired that have led us to recording anyway. But as it stands right now, we will not have a show the following week. So that will be the week of, let's see, the date would be the 18th. So we won't have a new episode on the 18th. I will be on vacation, I very much hope, if all goes according to plan. So again, not wanting to jinx anything and knocking on some wood here, we will not have a new show on July 18th. We'll be back.
I see how it is. When you go on vacation, we just skip the week. When I go on vacation, I go out of my way to make sure we record.
You're more than welcome to produce the entire podcast and host it and find somebody to co-host that week, and we will publish it. That's fine, Jason.
Well, I don't know how to do any of that. So
then
that won't
I
be
rest
happening.
my case.
All right, moving on.
All right. Okay, let's get to the news. Right after we recorded, I think later that
As
evening,
tradition,
or just the very next morning, the investigators in India announced that they had flown the flight recorders from Ahmedabad to Delhi and processed them the same day, or they downloaded the data that very same day. So the recorders from Flight 171 have now been downloaded. They were downloaded by Indian investigators with assistance from the US NTSB on the ground. Data has been extracted, and they are now analyzing that. So hopefully, we will have a preliminary report that it is my fervent wish that it puts to rest all of the conspiracy theories or conspiracy adjacent theories about this crash within a couple weeks, about 30 days after the crash. So about June 13th-ish. We'll see if that comes to pass. But good news, those recorders have been downloaded. They are being analyzed. So that was an interesting delay that has been not explained thus far.
Yeah. Also, I think we had initially saw that India was not allowing the UN ICAO to join the investigation, as is really kind of custom. But again, since then, that has changed, and now India has apparently changed its tune and has permitted ICAO to join as observers to the investigation, which I don't know why it wouldn't have allowed in the first place. But after a rocky start to this investigation, things seem to have righted themselves, I guess. Really seemed unnecessary, all those bits, but now it seems to be much more of a normal investigation, though we still haven't really heard anything out of them, which I guess is fine. Different countries handle things differently, but at least things seem to be going in the correct direction at this point.
I mean, that's good. I don't think that anyone really thought there wouldn't be a thorough investigation here. It was just kind of confusing.
It was weird. It just seemed like
what was happening.
Complicated.
Yeah,
at the
exactly.
beginning.
Exactly. It was very strange why things were happening the way they were and what was happening. But now things, as Jason said, seem to be back on track. Speaking of investigations that are a bit unusual, this week, or last week rather, the Chinese government announced that it would not issue the required interim annual report on the investigation into the crash of China Eastern Airlines Flight 5735. This was the crash that occurred. The flight was on its way from Kunming to Guangzhou, and the aircraft very suddenly and very steeply went into a dive and crashed to the west of Guangzhou, falling from, I think it was 30,000 feet in just a very short time. The announcement this week was that the CAAC, which is both similar to the US FAA, where it is both the regulator and administrative body, they announced that they would withhold the interim annual report, citing threats to national security and social stability. So the annual interim report is required in the absence of a final report for any investigation that extends beyond 12 months. Interim annual reports have been issued thus far. They haven't said anything, but they've always been issued. But now the CAA is saying, we're not going to do that because the progress report, if released, quote, may endanger national security and social stability.
Yeah. So before we started recording, I had chatting with Ian. I said, this closes the loop, basically. We're never going to hear what happened. We're never going to get the final report. But you countered, Ian, and what did you say?
Well, you're half right. We will likely never see a final report, but it doesn't close the loop necessarily. It creates an infinite loop. If they follow ICAO guidelines, I guess they'll have to announce that they're not releasing a required report every year.
Every year, annually, forever.
Forever.
Basically. So the loop will never be closed because they will never, presumably, never release this report.
Right. So the reason that they're not releasing this report is unknown. However,
officially, it's unknown. Anecdotally, we all know what happened and why.
Well, it's widely believed, based on the evidence that we've seen, based on experts that have analyzed both the evidence that's publicly available and some evidence that is not, that this crash was caused deliberately by one of the pilots. So that would be in line with the report not being released.
Yeah, very disappointing that China wouldn't release this report. Yes, there is a degree of shame in this crash. Of course, you never want an incident like this to happen, but China wouldn't be alone here. This has happened before. This has happened to other major Western countries. Most notably in recent history would be the Germanwings crash several years ago. But it's just disappointing that China refuses to disclose this final report. It's not right to do so, but at least they'll have to acknowledge it every year.
One would hope.
Presumably forever.
Yeah, one would hope. I have a feeling this might be the end of their public pronouncements on the subject, but we'll see. In other report news, this one opens up a whole new can of worms. The National Grid has completed its report into the Heathrow transformer fire, and boy, oh boy, is it not good for them. What they found was that moisture entering transformer bushings caused an electrical short and arcing, which then ignited coolant oil, which led to the fire that we all saw. That's bad and rather unfortunate.
But it gets worse because that's just stuff that happened.
That's what happened. The bad part is that this particular fault at this particular transformer at this particular site was first discovered in 2018.
So if it was discovered in 2018 and nothing happened until it failed in 2025, it must have been underrated. And, the failure, they must have said like, oh, it's, a 2% chance it's going to happen, right?
This particular failure was initially rated when discovered in 2018 as imminent, meaning that if it wasn't fixed, it was going to, do what it did quickly.
Well, now, hats off to that transformer for taking so very long, hanging in there for damn near a decade after a critical fault was identified, and the UK's National Grid apparently did nothing for the better part of a decade. That's not great.
They tried so very hard, apparently, to fix the problem and just never did it.
And they can't even blame, COVID supply chain shortages. If it was discovered in 2018, they had 2 years before any of that.
This was one of those things where they were like, well, it's going to be difficult because we're going to have to deal with switching power off to Heathrow in a particular way. And so instead of figuring that out and doing it, it sounds like they just didn't. So what ended up happening is a massive fire at one of the 3 substations feeding Heathrow power. The fire resulted in more than 100 diversions and nearly 1,300 cancellations. Therefore, Heathrow is now considering legal action against National Grid.
I'm sure they were considering it regardless, but this is good evidence to have in their case. That's bad. It's like all those stories you read about other pieces of infrastructure, like bridges, where bridges are inspected annually, at least here, theoretically in the US. And they're like, this bridge is structurally deficient. It's going to fail. And then it fails. And then it collapses. And you're like, why didn't they replace it? Well, we just never got around to it. But this seems bad. But transformers are big. They are expensive. They are difficult to replace. So it's not surprising that they didn't immediately do it. But man, that's a long time to sit on something that could have impacts that dramatic.
Yeah. I bet they'll move a little bit quicker next time.
Or not.
Or not. Switching gears completely and leaving fires behind, Boeing is getting a new CFO. Jay Malave is taking over from Brian West. Malave was formerly the CEO of Lockheed Martin until April, where he left to pursue new opportunities. We now know what the new opportunity was. West is going to stay on as an advisor to CEO Kelly Ortberg to make the transition as seamless as possible. It's news. I mean, obviously, anytime there's a major C-suite transition at a company like Boeing or Airbus, we're going to talk about it. But it's not entirely surprising. We knew that Ortberg was going to bring in his own people. And here's what Ortberg had to say about the transition. Quote, Brian and I believe this is the right time to hand the reins to a new leader as we embark on the next chapter of our company's growth and development. Makes sense?
Okay, sure.
He wants his money guy. That said, they've got some problems coming their way that could be large or could not be that much of a problem at all. We'll see in less than 40 working days because UK competition regulators have launched a phase 1 probe into Boeing's acquisition of Spirit Aerosystems. So,
oh, come on. To what end?
that's entirely up to the CMA. The Competition and Markets Authority has launched a phase 1 investigation, which gives them 40 working days to make a determination on whether to proceed. So they say, hey, we want to look into this. We've got 40 working days to decide whether or not we want to move on to phase 2. At that point, Boeing and Spirit can say, hey, you've identified some things that are going to move us on to phase 2. How about we fix those problems and save us all some trouble? So I love this phrase. They can do what is called undertakings in lieu. So in lieu of moving forward to phase 2, Boeing and Spirit can make undertakings. They can undertake things to make this all go away.
Oh, love a good undertaking.
I think this is just... So what this concerns is Spirit's work at Prestwick and at Belfast. And I'm not really sure what the UK is upset about here. I mean, Spirit was part of Boeing at one point, and now most of Spirit is going to become part of Boeing again. Some of it will become part of Airbus, and some of it will be owned by Boeing, but be neither Boeing nor Airbus. And I'm not really sure what their goal is. Like, what would be the remedy here? That's what I can't figure out.
I don't know. Could this possibly get down the road to the point where they block Boeing from acquiring these bits and pieces of Spirits? I hope not, because no one else is going to take it.
Yeah, I don't see how any of this would end other than, I mean, there might be some concessions here as far as work promises
remedies,
remedies, undertakings even.
Undertakings, that's it.
But I don't see this continuing into a phase 2 investigation because I don't think that's what anyone wants.
No, I don't think that makes any sense.
Interesting, though, that there's a phase 1 investigation. I'm a little confused by this, but we'll see where it goes and see what they say at the end of 40 working days. So coming up on that in just a couple of weeks now. So I think the end of July is when the clock runs out on this. Let's talk about data breaches because it's going around. Qantas is the most recent airline to be affected by data breaches, with 6 million customers affected due to a breach through one of its call centers. Previously, within the last couple of weeks, both WestJet and Hawaiian Airlines have also been hit by data breaches. None of the breaches have affected the operational side of the airline. It has all been customer-facing stuff, which is still rather unfortunate. But it's good to know that things seem to be firewalled appropriately so that none of the operational side of things are being affected.
Yeah, before I had heard about this spat of data breaches, got a really ominous press release or press statement from the FAA. Just said, we're aware of the incident at Hawaiian Airlines and are assured that things are safe. And I'm like, what the hell happened?
Yeah, right?
Was there a crash? Was there an incident? What happened?
It sent us all scrambling, trying to figure out what happened.
They could have just mentioned data breach, and I would have been like, oh, yeah, I don't care. But man, really could have used that context in that FAA release.
Yeah, I totally forgot about that one. Yes, that was a bizarre release. It was very matter of fact and very ominous. So this is interesting in a couple of ways because it's coming through not just at the airlines, but airline IT vendors. So one of the attack vectors is basically vendors who have contracts with airlines for customer support related activities. That's how they're getting into these airlines. And so it sounds like this is unfortunately a new thing, for lack of a better term, which is rather unfortunate because there's no shortage of good data that the airlines have on a lot of their loyal customers.
Yeah, well, or claim to have. But whose credit card hasn't been breached? I recently had my Alaska Airlines credit card become a victim of fraud. I never even used that card. I don't even carry it with me. Yet somehow that one was still compromised. So
that doesn't bode a lot of confidence.
No, it doesn't. So this stuff happens, and it happens a lot, and it happens to cards you might not even think. At least in my personal case, the bank caught it and declined all the transactions. But just like this stuff is that common that a credit card I never use and don't even carry with me was still compromised. So just update your passwords. Use a password manager. Use two-factor authentication. Use all of the stuff you're probably not using.
And some more.
Or whatever.
Okay. Let's talk about good news. SAS has ordered 45 firm examples and 10 options of the Embraer E195-E2. Deliveries are going to begin in 2027, and they'll take about one aircraft a month over the next 4 years and change. The aircraft will have around 136 seats, and they will serve that kind of too big for the CRJ 900, but too small for the A320neo markets around Scandinavia.
Are these replacing the CRJ 900s, or are they for fleet expansion?
These are for fleet expansion.
Ooh, that's exciting. So often when we talk about aircraft orders, it's about fleet replacement, especially for the smaller jets like this, but for it to be a fleet expansion, that's exciting.
Yeah. So they're planning on slotting these in between the CRJs and the A320neos. So they'll be opening up, hopefully, a few interesting new routes when these begin delivery in 2027.
It sounds like they'll also be mainline operated as well. These won't be SAS. What do they call their regional operation?
Well, there's SAS Connect, but there's also SAS Ireland.
Yeah, like it's more complicated than you would think, but I think these are mainline SAS aircraft.
I mean, I'm sure they will become part of a subsidiary somewhere because of the pilot and flight attendant pay scales.
Yeah.
Somewhere. But yeah, I mean, they'll be SAS aircraft.
But there's one more aspect to this order that we talked again quite a bit about.
At length.
At length. Too much at length, actually.
Too long.
Before we started recording, and that multiple times SAS quoted in its press release, its social post, that this was its largest direct aircraft order since 1996. And we could not find an aircraft order occurring from SAS in 1996. I'm pretty sure one did not occur. But back in 1995, I believe the airline ordered 41 737-600s. Which is a large order back then. But it has been a long time since SAS has placed a large direct from manufacturer order. But Ian, you threw 737-800s in the mix, and I don't know how we are so uncertain about what they did or did not order.
I'm just telling you what Boeing's own order and delivery website says.
And I'm telling you what's on the brilliantly formatted 1996 SAS corporate annual report, which only mentions orders for firm orders for the 737-600 and -8 Q400, which is fun.
I don't know what to tell you, but neither Jason nor I could find an order in 1996. So while technically true, this is in fact their largest order since 1996 and 97 and 98, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We couldn't find an order in 96. So we assume they mean the 737-600 order from 95, but who knows?
Of which were only just recently retired.
Yes, that's true. They did stick around for quite some time. Those little baby 737s. Where are we going next? We're going to Mexico, Jason.
That's nice.
Well, we're starting in Brazil and we're heading to Mexico because Mexicana is taking delivery or has just taken delivery of its first E195-E2. So this is not only the first E2 for the newly reconstituted Mexicana, this is the first new aircraft for the airline. The other 737s and ERJ 145s have come from elsewhere within Mexico's collection. These are new aircraft just delivered, and they are the first of 10 E195-E2s that the airline will take, and they will also take a further 10 E190-E2s. So good for them.
Yeah, somehow this thing is still a thing, at least for now. Apparently they've scaled back their operation a little bit because who would have foreseen that they're losing money? But they're still trying because it's state-backed, so What's there to lose except taxpayer
state-backed and
dollars?
state-run.
No problem.
If you're looking to check out the livery on the aircraft, the registration is X-Ray Alpha, Mike X-Ray Alpha. So go ahead and check that out. And we'll toss a link in the show notes.
If nothing else.
Yes, if nothing else. Speaking of deliveries, though this one took a lot longer to get home than Mexicana's E2, Qantas has taken delivery of its first A321XLR. The aircraft departed Hamburg, made a stop in Bangkok, and then made it all the way to Sydney on a total Great Circle distance of 10,164 miles.
With only one stop.
Total track miles, 10,995. So nearly 11,000 miles in flight, or 17,694 kilometers for anyone listening to this podcast outside of the US. That's a way to stretch the aircraft's legs. Obviously, empty for the most part, just some crew on board, but still a pretty impressive haul.
Yeah, and these 321 XLRs, at least initially, their new life at Qantas doesn't see them doing flights such as this, super long haul for a narrow body. I think they're just directly replacing the 737-800s in Qantas's fleet. So they're not really going to stretch the XLR bit of the 321 XLR, but they certainly can and probably will in the future.
Yes, exactly. This first batch as Jason said, is basically 737 replacements, which is slightly disappointing, but hey, you got to do what you got to do. Speaking of doing necessary things, Delta has been very busy this week, especially at the beginning part of the week when they had to inspect more than 100 aircraft after severe storms that included heavy hail moved through Atlanta. At one point, Atlanta's control tower was even evacuated due to a microburst on the field.
Ugh.
So this particular event also, we think, ends up being one of the greatest diversion events because of the time that it hit and the number of flights that were already in the air away from a single airport. I think even besting the number of diversions away from Doha last week during the Iranian missile attacks.
Yeah, because this is Atlanta. It's not just, a wide body long haul operation. It's Atlanta. They go everywhere. At least Delta goes everywhere from Atlanta, from super short haul to super long haul. At one point when I pulled up the jet tip diversion tracker, it was showing 115 diversions. I'm sure that number at some point went higher throughout the day. Do we know how many diversions there were in total? Or is it unknowable?
Not necessarily unknowable, but I didn't pull a final total, though it ended up being, I think, over 120.
It's a lot. A lot of them went to Nashville, Charlotte, Huntsville, Savannah, Birmingham, Jacksonville, Raleigh, Durham, Charleston. It goes on and on, all the way down to Florida. I guess a lot of flights actually return to their origin. But man, that was not great. It's the kind of thing that's going to happen with increasing frequency too. Really, one thing I picked up on particular was how some non-Delta airlines that do have a presence in Atlanta were handling the situation. And I think the word poorly comes to mind, or not, until it was too late. Frontier in particular has a nice little operation at Atlanta, and a number of its flights landed after the storm, either before or after the storm rolled through, and sat for hours and hours and hours without getting a gate, up to 4 in excess of 5 hours, which by far exceeds the limitation for domestic flights until the DOT gets involved and heavy fines start to get instituted, although maybe not in this case since it was a weather event. But only after a lot of these aircraft were on the ground for 4 or 5 hours did Frontier finally start diverting flights away. And I just cannot imagine being trapped on a Frontier aircraft for 4 or 5 hours after landing at an airport. That's just cruel and unusual. And I feel bad for those people.
Yeah. I understand the ones that land, just before the storm hits, or they're very near the airport and then they land, right after. But they continued to send aircraft to Atlanta, knowing full well that there was no way they were going to get a gate anytime soon.
With a finite number of gates. This isn't, some other airports where you can go to any gate in a particular terminal. There are only a handful of gates that Frontier, I guess not authorized to use, but is contracted out to use, and those are Frontier's gates. At some point, I hope that Frontier was granted access to other gates, but at that point, I'm sure Delta was more than short on its own gate. So,
but Frontier only has X number of ground staff to bring those planes in, to make sure that people can get off those planes, and then to make sure that if that plane's at the wrong gate, it gets back to the right gate eventually.
Being an airline is hard.
Being an airline is hard. And so the decision was interesting to me. I'm sure they thought they were doing the best thing that they could at the moment, but it seemed like they were just sending good planes after bad.
Yep. Ugh. Tough situation.
In Brazil, there is an interesting report that just came out from Brazilian investigators on a flight that occurred in November of 2021. So an Azul Airbus A320neo was taking off from Cuiabá and had to reject the takeoff at 90 knots. They had a hydraulic system warning, and so they decided to reject the takeoff well before V1. So not necessarily a low speed abort, but certainly not the highest speed that we've ever seen a flight hit the brakes on. However, they hit the brakes hard enough that the smoke from the brakes, this was a nighttime flight, the smoke from the brakes, along with the anti-collision beacons on the top and bottom of the aircraft that flash red, plus the white strobe lights, they, quote, may have given the impression that the aircraft was on fire because passengers started freaking out. And in turn, the flight attendants sort of freaked out. And the pilots made an emergency call to the flight attendants. And the flight attendants assumed that that emergency call, what the pilots were actually saying was, everything's fine. But because it was an emergency call, what the flight attendants assumed was the plane is on fire. And so they evacuated the aircraft in an uncommanded fashion, which is not great. But even not greater is that the engines were still running.
There is a lot wrong here. This is I don't know if this is poor training or just, nerves in the moment, but this is all sorts of bad. It all went wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Part of what the report focuses on is the fact that the flight attendants mistakenly thought that passengers had already begun evacuating the aircraft out the overwing exits. And when the pilots made the emergency call to the flight attendants, they assumed because that was not part of the standard procedure, they believed that that was a cue to evacuate the aircraft.
Yikes.
Thankfully, the engines, while on, were only running at idle thrust or at idle power.
I mean, idle thrust is enough. You've seen what happens to cones on the ramp at even idle thrusts.
I'm just saying it could have been even worse than it was. Thankfully, no one was injured by the engines. There were injuries during the evacuation, including one serious injury, but no one got sucked into an engine.
That's good. Sure.
15 passengers injured, including one seriously. So the worst part about all of this, Jason.
How could it be worse?
The hydraulic system warning
was
the
false.
Sensor had fallen into the oil reservoir.
Oh, that's hot.
So it was just a broken sensor.
Oh, poor sensor. Yeah. What a way to go.
The United States Supreme Court has rejected American Airlines' appeal on the Northeast Alliance ruling that had invalidated the tie-up between American Airlines and JetBlue. Widely expected. I don't think they wanted to touch that. I don't think there was appetite for that. But needless to say, I'm sure American is disappointed. I'm not sure if JetBlue is disappointed because that would have been weird for them to come back and be like,
we don't really want this, but we're here because we have to be.
We're here because we have to be. On the flip side of that, JetBlue, having recently concluded its Blue Sky thing? Not alliance, agreement. Well, Spirit Airlines, which had previously been trying to merge with JetBlue, is now calling this blue sky thing anti-competitive and possibly detrimental to smaller airlines. The language that they're using is, as usual for these types of filings, very flowery and over the top. Spirit calls JetBlue, says JetBlue will become a de facto vassal of United. And if United can do this to JetBlue, then what's to stop Delta or American from doing this to other airlines? And Spirit will be forced to acquiesce to their demands.
I'm not sure how to process any of that.
I don't think anybody is, but that's what Spirit's arguing to the DOT.
Yeah, so Spirit backed into a corner here, is lashing out, I guess, grasping at straws to do anything here. Spirit doesn't seem to have much of a future. So I'm not sure what the end goal is here, because even with JetBlue not being tied up with United, Spirit itself seems to be in a dire situation. So I don't really see the blue sky, not an alliance, whatever it is, thing really being the thing that Spirit needs to look out for at this point. And the thought that, Delta would do this with what Frontier is just laughable. Like, who is left to do this with? And American already has a very, very similar agreement with Alaska. So yeah, not really sure how this could possibly be a thing that anyone really takes seriously. But if you're in Spirit's situation, you got to do whatever you can to attempt to stay afloat.
First of all, I get that they feel like they have to do something. But I also don't understand how attacking this particular arrangement, say the DOT agrees with them and invalidates it, I'm not sure how that helps Spirit.
I don't know. I mean, feel like the best thing that could happen to Spirit right now is if Delta walked up to and said, hey, Spirit, you want to do a thing with us and be like partners, but not really? If I were Spirit, I would say, yes, absolutely, please. So yeah, strange situation.
We could rename Spirit's song.
No.
Okay, maybe not. Call it Ted?
No.
Okay, fine. The European Union Aviation Safety Agency is proposing a takeoff performance monitoring systems for large transport aircraft. What all that means is that EASA has looked at the data from a number of investigations over the past few years and said, hey, it seems to us that pilots keep putting data in wrong, that aircraft are misconfigured, and if we can solve that problem, we could prevent a whole bunch of incidents from happening.
Okay.
And to do that, there are already certified pieces of software and systems that we can put into aircraft. So they've issued this proposal that would include 3 requirements, 2 of which would be mandatory for nearly all large aircraft, and then the third one just for the largest passenger aircraft. So the first one would be a check and alert on errors in the airplane takeoff performance parameters. So this would be the input and selection within the flight management system, or the equivalent across whatever that particular aircraft calls it. So did you put in the right numbers? Are you making the right assumptions about temperature, thrust, derated thrust? Are you sure of the aircraft center of gravity? Are you sure of the aircraft's weight? Are all of those things correct, and have you checked and double checked those? So that's number 1. Number 2 would be an alert on errors in airplane position and heading at the start of takeoff. So this would address intersection takeoffs. This would address we lined up at the wrong taxiway. This would address we're on a taxiway, things like that. And then the third one is real-time performance monitoring and alerting. So this is, in a sense, what is happening on board the aircraft during the takeoff roll. Are things as they should be? Are things developing as they should? Is everything going as expected? And if it's not, we're going to alert on that. So it would expand a lot of the alerts in what pilots are getting that could help them either reject the takeoff sooner or reconfigure the aircraft as needed.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the A350 has at least some of this baked in, right?
Yes. So these requirements would be only for new build aircraft and large transport aircraft. So that comes out of some of these systems that are already designed and certified, including stuff that's going into the A350.
Cool. So EASA is proposing doing what Airbuses already have been doing for 10 years. That's good.
Yes and no. They're proposing mandating it across large transport aircraft, so not just the A350.
Well, of course, yeah, that's good. I mean, in this case, Airbus, the large aircraft, is the A350. I guess it would trickle down to the A330, but if this is only for new build...
No. Large transport aircraft. So we're talking everything from, A320, 737. Whatever.
Well, that changes things
category, not just the biggest aircraft, but the category of large transport aircraft. Sorry.
Okay, so then Airbus would have to trickle down what it has already developed and rolled out for the A350 to all of the other airplanes.
Yes.
Seems like something doable for Airbus. Seems a lot harder for a Boeing type company who can't get beyond literal bells and lights in the flight deck. Shout out to the 737-10 and 7. But yeah, the Airbus is already doing a lot of this, but it would be great to see that trickle down to every other thing they make.
Yeah. Jason, let's close the show with some squirrels.
Weird. Usually we talk about raccoons.
But this time we are talking about the ongoing and massive squirrel infestation at the Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota.
Of course.
This one's just great for all sorts of reasons, mostly because it includes the phrase secret squirrel in a number of places. But Task and Purpose has a great article that is informative and it is in depth and it explains the problem that is occurring at the Air Force Base. But it also includes this paragraph.
Are you going to tell me about the 3-phase effort?
I'm not.
Oh, then I'll take that one.
Okay, Jason, explain the 3-phase effort.
Well, apparently this is not the first time they've dealt with this, because the headline image of a raccoon in a trap is from 2019 due to, quote, a previous infestation. But there is a 3-phase effort to deal with the squirrels, because you love a good 3-phase plan, right? Especially when it's squirrels. Well, the first phase involves families on the base housing, setting out traps, dealing with the immediate issue. And then, quote, the command is now initiating phase 2. Well, that's a very strong sentence, which is a 2-week rollout of a comprehensive plan for setting up traps and trying to capture the invasive critters. The third phase, which is long-term in nature, involves setting aside resources in the spring and fall to mitigate the number of DAC rats.
They're affectionately referred to as DAC rats, yes.
DAC rats on the base in greater numbers. So not only is there a plan, but there is a 3-phase plan with very strong language on how to deal with squirrels.
I like this story for a variety of reasons, but most of which is that the United States Air Force is bringing in, quote, subject matter experts to assist.
So cats?
I don't know. Exterminators? Cats? Yeah, it could column A, column B.
Is this going to end up like that The Simpsons gag from the Whacking Day episode where to get rid of the squirrels, they bring in cats, and to get rid of the cats, they bring in dogs, and to get rid of dogs, they bring in wolves, and to get wolves, they bring in bears, and so on and so on. And then the end is just, well, that's the great part of the plan. But come winter, all the animals freeze to death. Probably not.
That's exactly what this is, though.
I mean, it also kind of is, isn't it?
It is. But hopefully, this will be the last time that the Air Force Base has to deal with a ground squirrel infestation.
What a story.
What a story. And on that note, this has been episode 327 of AvTalk. Thank you all so very much for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode, and then a reminder that we will be off the week that the show would come out on the 18th of July, barring anything, but really just let's not do that this time. All right, Jason?
Okay, I can handle it myself. I don't know how to record or publish or edit.
We'll do it live then.
I'll talk to myself.
There you go. All right. That works. This has been episode 327 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick, here as always with
Jason Rubinowitz. Thanks for listening.